On September 14th, 2023, I responded to what should have been a routine apartment fire that turned into the most horrifying rescue of my career. What started as a standard structure fire became something that challenged everything I understood about life, death, and what happens in the moments between survival and loss. My name is Captain Jake Morrison. I was a firefighter with Nashville Fire Department Station 19 for 16 years until I submitted my resignation 3 weeks ago. In nearly 2 decades of firefighting, I thought I'd seen every type of fire, every possible rescue scenario, and every variation of what fire could do to human beings and the structures they live in. I was wrong. Nashville Fire Department Station 19 serves the downtown core and several surrounding neighborhoods, responding to over 3,000 calls annually, including structure fires, vehicle accidents, medical emergencies, and technical rescues. As a captain, I led a crew of 4 firefighters and was responsible for coordinating rescue operations during our most complex and dangerous calls. The call that ended my career came in at 2:47 a.m. on that Thursday morning in September. Dispatch reported a structure fire at the Riverside Apartments, a 3-story complex on Woodland Street that housed mostly elderly residents and young families. Initial reports indicated heavy smoke and flames visible from the 2nd floor, with possible occupants trapped inside. Station 19 was first due on the call, meaning we would be the first fire company to arrive on scene and begin rescue operations. Our crew that night consisted of myself, Lieutenant Danny Foster, firefighters Kevin Hayes and Michael Torres, and our probationary firefighter, Lisa Coleman, who had been with the department for just 6 months. The ride to Riverside Apartments took 4 minutes through the empty downtown Nashville streets. As we approached the scene, I could see the orange glow of flames reflecting off the clouds and heavy black smoke billowing into the night sky. This was clearly a working fire that would require multiple companies and aggressive interior operations. "Looks like we're going to be busy tonight," I told my crew as we turned onto Woodland Street. "Remember your training, stay with your partners, and let's get everyone out safely." We arrived at the Riverside Apartments at 2:51 a.m. to find a scene of controlled chaos. The 3-story brick apartment building was heavily involved in fire on the 2nd floor, with flames extending through multiple windows and threatening to spread to the 3rd floor. Smoke was pouring from the building, and I could see several residents who had evacuated standing on the sidewalk across the street. I established command and began coordinating the response. Engine 12 and Ladder 7 were en route with estimated arrival times of 3 and 5 minutes, respectively. Battalion Chief Williams was also responding to take over command operations once additional resources arrived. "Foster, Hayes, you're going interior for primary search on the 1st floor," I ordered as we pulled our equipment from the engine. "Torres, Coleman, you're with me on the 2nd floor. We need to check every unit for occupants." The building's super, Robert Martinez, met us as we were donning our breathing apparatus and preparing for interior operations. He was a man in his 60s who had managed the building for over 20 years and knew every resident personally. "Captain, I think everyone got out, but I'm not sure about apartment 2B, Martinez said urgently. "That's Mrs. Angela Brooks. She's 78 years old and has mobility problems." I knocked on her door but got no response. The fire started somewhere near her unit. "Any other units you're concerned about?" I asked while checking my air pack and radio equipment. "Maybe 3A. That's the Johnson family, David, Jennifer, and their 2 kids. But I saw David outside earlier, so they might all be out." I assigned Foster and Hayes to confirm that all 1st floor units were clear while Torres, Coleman, and I would focus on the 2nd floor, starting with Mrs. Brooks in 2B. The fire was most intense on the 2nd floor, but we had a brief window before flashover conditions would make interior operations impossible. At 2:57 a.m., my team entered the building through the front stairwell. The interior was filled with thick black smoke that reduced visibility to less than 3 feet. The heat was intense, but manageable with our protective equipment, and I could hear the crackling of flames somewhere ahead of us. We climbed to the 2nd floor, staying low and following the wall to maintain orientation in the zero visibility environment. The hallway was filled with superheated smoke and gases, but we could still advance with our breathing apparatus providing clean air. "Command to Interior Team 2, I radioed. "We're on the second floor, starting primary search. Smoke conditions are heavy but manageable." "Copy. Interior Team 2. Engine 12 is setting up for fire attack. Ladder 7 is preparing for ventilation operations." Torres was carrying our thermal imaging camera, which would help us locate victims in the smoke-filled environment. Coleman stayed close behind me, managing our search rope that would guide us back to the exit if conditions deteriorated rapidly. We reached the door to apartment 2B and found it unlocked. I tested the door with the back of my hand. It was warm, but not dangerously hot, indicating that flashover conditions hadn't developed in this unit yet. "Nashville Fire Department," I called out loudly as we entered the apartment. "Is anyone inside?" There was no response, but Torres's thermal camera immediately picked up a heat signature in what appeared to be the living room area. "Captain, I've got a possible victim about 10 feet ahead near what looks like a couch or chair," Torres reported. We advanced carefully through the apartment, which was filled with smoke but not yet showing active fire. As we reached the living room, our flashlights illuminated an elderly woman lying motionless on the floor beside an overturned walker. "I've got her," I called to Torres and Coleman. "She's unconscious, but breathing." Mrs. Brooks was a small woman, probably weighing less than 120 pounds. She was wearing a nightgown and appeared to have fallen while trying to evacuate her apartment. There were no obvious signs of burns, but she was unconscious from smoke inhalation. I lifted Mrs. Brooks and started carrying her toward the apartment door while Torres and Coleman cleared the rest of the unit to ensure no one else was inside. The smoke conditions were worsening, and I could hear the sound of flames getting closer. "Command, Interior Team 2 has one victim from 2B, elderly female, unconscious but breathing, coming out for medical treatment." "Copy, Team 2. Medical is standing by." We exited apartment 2B and started moving toward the stairwell when Coleman's voice came over the radio with urgency that made my blood run cold. "Captain Torres, I'm getting multiple heat signatures from 2C. It looks like there might be several people inside." I stopped in the hallway, still carrying Mrs. Brooks. Apartment 2C wasn't on our list of units to check. Martinez hadn't mentioned anyone living there, and there had been no reports of occupants in that unit. "Torres, confirm those readings," I ordered. "I'm showing at least 3 distinct heat signatures in 2C, Captain. They appear to be human-sized and positioned like people lying down or seated." I was faced with a decision that every firefighter dreads. I was carrying an unconscious victim who needed immediate medical attention, but Torres was reporting multiple potential victims in an adjacent apartment that was showing signs of increasing fire involvement. "Coleman, take Mrs. Brooks and get her to the medics," I ordered, transferring the elderly woman to our probationary firefighter. "Torres, you're with me. We're checking 2C. "Captain, should we wait for backup?" Coleman asked. Engine 12's crew was still working to establish their attack line, and Ladder 7 was setting up ventilation operations on the roof. "Negative. If there are people in there, we may not have time to wait." Coleman started moving Mrs. Brooks toward the exit while Torres and I approached apartment 2C. The door was locked, but I could force it with the Halligan tool from our equipment. As I worked to force the door, Torres monitored the thermal camera. "Captain, those heat signatures are still there, but they're not moving. Could be unconscious victims." I forced the door open and immediately knew something was wrong. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, no signs that anyone had lived there recently. But Torres's thermal camera was still showing multiple human-shaped heat signatures throughout the unit. "This doesn't make sense," Torres said, scanning the empty apartment with his flashlight. "The thermal is showing people, but there's nobody here." That's when I noticed something that would haunt me for the rest of my career. The heat signatures on Torres's thermal camera weren't random shapes. They were positioned exactly like a family. 2 larger signatures that appeared to be adults, and 2 smaller ones that looked like children. They were arranged as if they were sitting together on a couch that wasn't there. Torres, are you sure this equipment is working properly? I tested it before we came in, Captain. It was reading normal temperatures on everything else. I took the thermal camera from Torres and scanned the apartment myself. The heat signatures were clearly visible, 4 human-shaped forms arranged in what looked like a family group. But we were looking at an empty apartment with bare walls and concrete floors. Command, Interior Team 2 needs immediate technical assistance. We're getting anomalous readings from our thermal equipment in apartment 2C. Copy, Team 2. What's your status on occupants? I hesitated before responding. How do you explain that your equipment is showing people who aren't there? Command, we're showing possible heat signatures, but we can't locate any actual occupants. Request backup team for confirmation. Negative on backup, Team 2. All interior teams are committed to confirmed rescues. If you can't locate occupants, exit immediately. Fire conditions are deteriorating. Torres and I spent another 2 minutes searching the empty apartment thoroughly. There was absolutely no one inside. No hiding places where unconscious victims could be concealed, and no explanation for the thermal camera readings. But as we prepared to leave, Torres grabbed my arm. Captain, look at the thermal screen. The heat signatures had changed position. The 2 smaller signatures, which had been arranged like children sitting, were now positioned as if they were standing and moving toward the larger signatures. Equipment malfunction, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Let's get out of here. As Torres and I exited apartment 2C and started moving toward the stairwell, we heard Foster's voice over the radio from the first floor. Command, Interior Team 1 has located multiple victims in apartment 1A, family of 4, all unconscious. We need immediate medical backup and additional personnel for evacuation. My blood ran cold. A family of 4, 2 adults and 2 children. Torres, what was the apartment number where Martinez said the Johnson family lived? He said 3A, Captain. 3rd floor. But Foster was reporting a family of 4 in apartment 1A on the 1st floor, and our thermal camera had been showing heat signatures arranged like a family of 4 in the empty apartment 2C. Command, this is Captain Morrison. Can you confirm the apartment number for the Johnson family rescue? Affirmative, Captain. Team 1 has the Johnson family from apartment 1A. David, Jennifer, and 2 children, ages 6 and 8. All victims are unconscious but alive. I stared at Torres's thermal camera, which was still showing the 4 heat signatures in the empty apartment behind us. As I watched, the signatures began to fade and disappear, as if whatever had been generating them was moving away or losing power. Captain, they're gone, Torres said, pointing at the thermal screen that now showed normal background temperatures throughout the empty apartment. After we exited the building and transferred command to Battalion Chief Williams, I found Robert Martinez and asked him about the apartments and their occupants. Martinez, tell me about apartment 2C. Who lives there? 2C has been vacant for 8 months, Captain. We had some water damage from a pipe leak and haven't finished the repairs yet. What about before that? Who was the last tenant? Martinez looked uncomfortable. That was the Harrison family, David and Elizabeth Harrison, and their 2 kids, boy and girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old. What happened to them? They died in a fire, Captain, 8 months ago, in that same apartment. Carbon monoxide from a faulty heater. The whole family was found together in the living room, like they just went to sleep. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Martinez, why didn't you tell us about this when we arrived? I didn't think it mattered, Captain. The apartment's been empty since then. Nobody lives there now. But Torres and I had seen thermal signatures of 4 people arranged like a family in that exact apartment. Heat signatures that had moved and changed position as if they were aware of our presence. The Johnson family from apartment 1A made full recoveries. David, Jennifer, and their 2 children had been overcome by smoke, but suffered no permanent injuries. They were treated at the scene and released from the hospital the next day. But during their medical evaluation, Jennifer Johnson said something that made me question everything we had experienced that night. Captain Morrison, I need to thank you and your team, Jennifer told the paramedic. I know this sounds strange, but while we were unconscious, I felt like someone was protecting us, keeping us safe until you could find us. What do you mean, ma'am? I dreamt about another family, a family that had lived in our building. They were showing us how to stay calm, how to breathe slowly to conserve oxygen. It felt like they were watching over us until help arrived. David Johnson confirmed his wife's account. Captain, I know we were unconscious, but both Jennifer and I had the same experience. We felt like we weren't alone, like there was another family there helping us survive until you could rescue us. Their children, 6-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Marcus, described similar experiences. They talked about the other kids who had stayed with them and told them not to be scared. In the days following the fire, I became obsessed with understanding what Torres and I had experienced in apartment 2C. I researched the Harrison family fire that had occurred 8 months earlier. According to the fire department records, David Harrison, 34, Elizabeth Harrison, 32, Michael Harrison, 8, and Sophie Harrison, 6, had died from carbon monoxide poisoning in apartment 2C on January 22, 2023. They were found in their living room, arranged as if they had simply fallen asleep together while watching television. The fire that killed them had been caused by a faulty space heater that produced deadly levels of carbon monoxide. The family had likely lost consciousness gradually and died peacefully in their sleep. But the more I researched the case, the more disturbing details I discovered. The Harrison family fire had been investigated by Captain Dennis Walsh, who had since retired from the department. When I contacted him, he told me something that made my investigation even more troubling. Jake, that was one of the strangest fire scenes I ever worked, Captain Walsh told me. We found the Harrison family arranged in the living room like they were waiting for something. But here's the thing, the carbon monoxide levels in that apartment should have made them disoriented and confused before they lost consciousness. Instead, they appeared to have positioned themselves deliberately, like they were prepared for what was happening. What do you mean, prepared? They were all lying down in a row, holding hands, with pillows under their heads. It looked like they had arranged themselves for comfort before losing consciousness. That's not typical behavior for carbon monoxide victims. Captain Walsh went on to tell me that the Harrison family had been beloved in the building. David had been a social worker who helped other tenants with various problems. Elizabeth had been a nurse who provided informal medical care to elderly residents. Their children had been known throughout the building for their kindness to other kids and adults. Jake, if there's such a thing as a family that would try to help others, even after death, it would be the Harrisons. They spent their lives taking care of people in that building. As I continued investigating, I discovered that the Riverside Apartments had a history of unusual rescue situations. Over the past 8 months since the Harrison family fire, there had been 3 other emergency calls to the building where firefighters and paramedics reported unexplained assistance during rescue operations. In March, Engine 7 had responded to a medical emergency involving an elderly man who had fallen in his apartment. The crew reported feeling guided to his location, despite poor visibility due to smoke from a small kitchen fire. In June, Ladder 12 had responded to a child who had become trapped in a mechanical room. The rescue team reported hearing children's voices that seemed to be directing them to the victim's location. In August, just 1 month before our call, Rescue 3 had responded to a gas leak that had caused several residents to lose consciousness. The crew reported thermal signatures that led them to victims, but then disappeared once the rescues were completed. Each of these incidents had occurred in the same building where the Harrison family had died. Each had involved unexplained assistance during rescue operations, and each had resulted in successful outcomes with no casualties. 2 weeks after the Riverside Apartments fire, I returned to the building to speak with some of the residents about their experiences. I wanted to understand if anyone else had encountered unexplained phenomena related to the Harrison family. Mrs. Dorothy Evans, who lived in apartment 1C, invited me into her apartment for coffee and told me something that confirmed my worst fears about what Torres and I had experienced. Captain Morrison, I need to tell you something that might sound crazy, Mr. Evans said. Ever since the Harrison family died, I've felt like they never really left the building. What do you mean, Mr. Evans? I mean, I still see them sometimes, not like ghosts or anything scary, just glimpses of them in the hallways or on the stairs. And whenever there's been an emergency in the building, I've felt like they were trying to help. Mr. Evans went on to describe multiple occasions when she had seen members of the Harrison family in the building, always in situations where someone needed assistance. The night of your fire rescue, Captain, I saw Elizabeth Harrison in the hallway outside the Johnson family's apartment. She was kneeling beside their door like she was watching over them. When I blinked, she was gone, but I knew she had been there. Other residents confirmed similar experiences. Martha Coleman from 3B described seeing Michael and Sophie Harrison playing in the building's courtyard, always near other children who lived in the building. James Wilson from 2A reported encountering David Harrison in the building's basement in areas where maintenance problems typically occurred. Captain, I know how this sounds, Mr. Evans concluded, but I think the Harrison family is still here, still taking care of people in this building the way they did when they were alive. 3 weeks after the Riverside Apartments fire, I made a decision that ended my career as a firefighter. I couldn't continue responding to emergency calls while wondering whether I was receiving assistance from victims of previous fires. The thermal signatures Torres and I had seen in apartment 2C were real. They represented something that challenged my understanding of life, death, and what happens to people who die trying to help others. If the Harrison family was somehow still present in the Riverside Apartments, still trying to protect and assist the building's residents, then they had guided us to the Johnson family and helped us complete a successful rescue operation. But the implications of accepting this possibility were staggering. It meant that death might not be the end of a person's ability to help others. It meant that some victims of fires and other emergencies might continue to exist in ways that could assist future rescue operations. Most disturbing was the realization that I might have been receiving help from the dead throughout my career without knowing it. How many successful rescues had involved assistance from previous victims? How many lives had been saved by people who were no longer alive? I submitted my resignation from Nashville Fire Department on October 5, 2023. In my resignation letter, I cited personal reasons for leaving, but the truth was that the Harrison family case had fundamentally altered my understanding of what it meant to be a firefighter. I moved to a small town in rural Tennessee where I work as an emergency medical technician, responding to medical calls that don't involve the kind of life and death rescue operations that had defined my career as a firefighter. But I still think about the Harrison family and the Riverside Apartments every day. I wonder if they continue to help during emergency situations in that building. I wonder how many other firefighters have encountered similar phenomena without recognizing what they were experiencing. Most of all, I wonder if the dead can truly continue to serve and protect the living, and whether my resignation represented an abandonment of people who might have been counting on my help to coordinate rescue operations with assistance from those who had passed before. The Johnson family continues to live at the Riverside Apartments. When I spoke with them several weeks after the fire, they told me that they had decided to stay in the building because they felt safe there. Captain Morrison, I know this might sound strange, Jennifer Johnson told me, but we feel like we're being watched over in this building. Ever since the fire, we've felt like there's someone looking out for our family. The building manager, Robert Martinez, has reported no unusual emergency calls since our rescue operation in September. But he has mentioned that several residents have described feeling protected and watched over by some kind of benevolent presence. Mr. Dorothy Evans continues to report occasional sightings of the Harrison family members, always in situations where they appear to be helping or protecting other residents. The thermal imaging equipment that Torres and I used that night was tested and found to be functioning normally. The manufacturer could provide no explanation for the readings we obtained in the empty apartment 2C. Station 19 continues to respond to calls at the Riverside Apartments. According to Lieutenant Foster, who took over my position, the crews report that rescue operations in that building seem to go more smoothly than in other locations, as if they're receiving assistance from an unknown source. The rescue operation at the Riverside Apartments will always remain the most terrifying experience of my firefighting career, not because of fire danger or physical threats, but because it suggested that the boundary between life and death might be more permeable than we realize. I continue to wonder whether Torres and I were assisted by the Harrison family during our rescue operations that night. If so, it means that some people who die in fires continue to exist in ways that allow them to help future rescue efforts. The possibility that the dead can continue to serve and protect the living is both comforting and terrifying. It suggests that death might not be the end of a person's ability to help others, but it also raises questions about the nature of existence that I'm not equipped to answer. I sleep better now in my rural EMT job, responding to medical calls that don't involve the complex rescue operations that defined my firefighting career. But I still wonder about the dozens of firefighters who continue to work structure fires every day, and whether they're operating with assistance from victims of previous fires who continue to watch over and protect the living. The thermal signatures I saw that September night still haunt me, not because of what they represented, but because of what they suggested about the continuing connection between those who serve and protect, even after death. If consciousness and the desire to help others can persist beyond physical death, then everything we think we know about service, sacrifice, and the nature of heroism may be based on an incomplete understanding of what it truly means to dedicate your life to saving others.